Greetings, hello, how are you? Hey, we are deep into module number 3 here, and for today we are going to elaborate further on our algebra from last lecture, and we're going to talk a little bit about tonnage. Now, with tonnage is a way to evaluate work. In training and working out, you're trying to find ways to evaluate performance and show performance to your clients or also to your athletes. And this could be in physical therapy where you teach people how to walk, lift, carry things, hold things, perhaps just become more mobile once again. In personal training, it might be weight loss, could be increased muscle mass, could be increased just fitness in general. Or in the strength and conditioning field, you're looking at different ways to evaluate performance in terms of weight moved, weight lifted, etc. And all three of those have their place, and all three of us can be evaluated. And realize with all three industries, you have different metrics that you use, and that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to find ways to evaluate and show performance to your clients or the athletes or your patients. I do want to go back over types of maxes. I think that'll have its place because that was a little bit of a mind-numbing exercise in the last video. And then it'll tie in nicely to tonnage. So if you recall, we had three different types of maxes. We had absolute, which is based on genetic predisposition, training and floating max, which varied based upon performance and based upon stressors placed on the human organism, positive stressors or negative stressors, and then test out max, which is where most coaches like to drive their athletes towards maybe after a 12-week mesocycle. I talked a little bit about this, and we got the color codification right with the floating now being black with the line being black. Absolute max is that genetic predisposition to performance, right? So you have some people who have chosen the right parents and they can bench a ton of weight. Their anthropometrics are right. The muscle fibering is right. You have some individuals who can run really far, really fast. Again, they have the right parents. They have the right genetic predisposition to excel in that particular activity. Now, when you look at lifting maxes, you have this floating max and test out max. And in general, when you place a training stimulus on the human organism, it will respond and respond over time with a little bit of an S-curve type application. And I made the point to tell or to speak to this last time. I talked about how performance gains on the front end of a program are greater than when you have somebody who has a higher training age and higher or greater age, because the amount of performance that they can eke out over 12 weeks is much less than somebody who's early on in a training program. So don't be surprised if you see a higher percentage performance increase on the front end of a training program, perhaps versus the back end of a training program. And that's specific to if you're in a quadrennial type format where you're working with athletes in a coached college or college coached environment where you have a freshman at 18 years old comes in, and you have a 21, 22-year-old who's been with you for multiple years. The performance gains, you might work an entire 12 weeks to get a half a percentage gain, where over here it might be a 5% gain. I went over training versus floating max, talked about the Epley formula, which this is not the Epley formula per se, it's just a real easy coefficient that you can use, and it was 0.03 per rep. And I said, if one thing in particular for this class, if you can remember one thing, it is if you do 10 reps, you're at 70%. If you do 10 reps times 0.03 for your coefficient, you got 1 minus that 0.3 right here, that gives you 70%. So if a person is doing bench press with 140 pounds, they're working, if they're doing bench press for 10 reps at 140 pounds, they're working at 70%, their max is going to be 200 pounds. And so tonnage has its place as well, right? So tonnage, when you evaluate work, sorry, it's going to be a little bit more algebra, but when you look at tonnage, it's a way to quantify the amount of work over multiple sets, the amount of work that you're placing on the human organism. How heavy was the weight? How many times was it moved? For how many sets? So if you do 3 sets of 10 at 140 pounds, how much weight did you actually move? So if we look at this and we go, okay, we have 3 sets of 10, which gives you 30 total reps. So now you can quantify the reps, which is another variable that you can use to quantify the amount of work you're placing on the human body. And you multiply that by somebody who did 50 pounds. So, okay, they did 30 total reps at 50 pounds. That's 1,500 total pounds of work completed. Think back to that boulder being pushed across the floor or pushed up the hill. you've done 1,500 total cumulative pounds of work over your 3 sets of 10. So here's the deal. If instead of doing 3 sets of 10, you do 3 sets of 12, that means you've done 36, not 30 reps. You're still using 50 pounds. You've done more work. You've actually done 1,800 pounds of work versus 1,500. You've had an increase of 300 pounds of work just by doing 2 extra reps each set. Let's look at this the other side. 3 sets of 10, 30 total reps, 50 pounds, 1,500. We got that. We know that. But we do 3 sets of 10 at 55 pounds. That yields us 1,650 total pounds of work. Neither right nor wrong, neither better nor worse. Just realize whether it's reps or weight, you can increase the overall workload down here or the total tonnage by changing the variables. If you push yourself for one more rep, or you push on and you go ahead and you put a 5-pounder instead of a 2.5. Great example, like when I was training in college for sports, my training partners and I, when we would work out and we would have a lifting day, we would never use 2.5s and we would never go down in weight, which meant that if we had a weight that was requiring 2.5 pounds, we would put 5s on. So our weight would go up, our workout weight would go up 5 pounds for that day. But here's the rub, right? 5 pounds over 3 sets or 4 sets of 8, 24 reps at 5 pounds, that adds up. But the other thing you have to remember is, because we never went down in weight and never used 2.5s, that flowed through and positively affected our training weight, right? So our floating max then went up as a result of that. So again, these two things tie together, and I made it a point to break them out in 2 different presentations because they can be a little bit overwhelming if all thrown at you at one time. But just in terms of performance and measuring performance, tonnage is a way to do it, and that tonnage flows through from the floating max concept that we had before. And just use that previous example, right? And you look at the tonnage. So they kind of now take your fingers and put the left hand and the right hand, tie them together like a dovetail, right? And you interlace your fingers. They work together so closely, whether it's number of reps completed or the weight utilized. As long as you're able to increase one or the other, you got mathematically, you got stronger. I can prove it to you just by doing some simple math on a sheet of paper. So when you work with your clients, eking out one more rep, adding another 5 pounds does make a difference, because the work you're placing on the human organism goes up. The training max, the floating max goes up. You're pushing the performance curve with your people. And you're trying to do that whether it's a physical therapist trying to get their client to do one more clamshell or perhaps one more balanced touch movement pattern to work on some type of movement pattern that maybe they're deficient in because of an injury. I don't care if it's a physical therapist or it's the strength and conditioning coach asking their client to do one more power clean with good technique. That is a stressor. It's quantifiable. It's a way to measure performance. And that's what this game is all about. On the front end, you're working on planning on applying a stressor to the human organism. You now have the ability to look at rep and set combinations and plan those out. We're starting to formulate that strategy, as opposed to just going into the gym and throwing a bunch of weights around. You want to do bench press and you want to do 5 sets of 6, or you want to do some type of rep and set combination. So you're planning that out, basing that off of a floating max that you have, knowing that if you do a little bit extra weight because of the math, you might end up doing 5 extra pounds on your bench press, or you might do one more rep. That floating max now goes up another 5, 10 pounds. So when you base your workout on the week after that, those weights go up another 5 to 10 pounds, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a flow-through component to this that's often missed, especially with personal trainers, because they just don't have that strength conditioning background to really think in terms of not only program design and mapping out rep and set combinations, but they don't have the concept of how it flows through. A little bit of performance increase today flows through and requires the person to increase their performance the next workout. And you increase there, then increases the next workout, it increases the floating max. And I go back to it all the time. Adaptation syndrome, applying a stressor. So on the front end, you'll see those kinds of gains with your clients. If you do this correctly, you go through the first couple of weeks where you get them acclimated to working out, then you go ahead and you'll see the increases in strength and you see the increases in their ability to pull, push, lift weight. over time, it becomes almost exponential. And then after several years, then it flattens out. So don't be afraid of pushing your people, because you will get a training response out of them. Just be smart about how you apply that stimulus on the front end so you don't blow them out of the water. All right, guys, go get yourself a good workout, and I'll catch you later on. Signing off.